so did not feel great.
And Tim said there will be trees this weekend.
Yeah, you did say that, didn't you?
Like no sympathy at all.
Well, my name's Aaron. For those of you that don't know me, I don't live too far from here, actually. I'm from Collingwood, so it's just an hour and a bit away, although it took us 3 hours to get here on Friday because of the weather. But before Collingwood, I lived in Kitchener, went to Bible college in Kitchener, and before Kitchener, I lived in London, which is where I met Tim. And yeah, we've known each other for about 20 years. And recently, it was more connected recently because we got involved here. So we're glad to be here. It's been great. We are quite familiar with the Muskokas because we live so close, but it's even better to know that there's people that we can now connect with now just in the Greater Toronto area. So and that's great. Let me pray real quick and then we'll jump in. Heavenly Father, thank you for today, for the people that were able to make the service this morning. Thank you for the youth that participated in the retreat weekend. We're just thankful for the time that we can set aside to connect with you this weekend and this morning. And just as you have pursued us, I just pray that we learn to pursue you. In Jesus' name, amen. So this weekend we've been talking about the truth of God and how we sometimes struggle with that because we're given all sorts of different truths. And so that's what you see up behind us here is on Friday night we talked about why we buy into conspiracy theories and how our world sometimes forms conspiracy theories about God. And so Saturday morning we gathered, actually on Friday night, we gathered everybody and said, we want you to write down all the things that you struggle with about connecting with God, whatever that is. And so they all came in, and so I kind of categorized them into 3 categories. And one was understanding God, one was prioritizing God, and the third one was how we live that out in our lives. And the biggest one that we noticed that we struggle with the most, and it might be true for some of you in here that aren't teenagers, the one that has the most writing on is prioritizing God. And we realize that our lives are so busy and so full that we tend to just not prioritize God in our lives. And so that's what we talked about this morning, is encouraging the teenagers and for the people in here too, is that God has to be a priority in our lives. He has to. And because we lack prioritizing, we lack understanding God. And so those two become in conflict with each other. If we don't prioritize God, we don't understand God. And if we don't understand God, we don't prioritize God. And so to break that, we really encourage them to start fitting God into their day. So that we can start understanding God and living that out. And so when I was talking to Tim about what we were going to do this morning in the service, I have a message that I spoke at a church that I worked at for 4 years. And the PowerPoint was really small, so we're going to zoom in a little bit to try and make it just a little easier to see. I worked at New Life Church in Collingwood. I'm one of Shane Brown, the leader of the band, was also the youth pastor at New Life, and after he left, I took his position for 4 years. And Shane's a pastor down in Kitchener too. But I'm now full-time with Youth for Christ in Collingwood. And so I really wanted to speak this message because it fit in with our weekend with the teenagers. And so I basically titled this God's Great Commotion, and it's really based on Acts 17, and it's one of my favorite verses in the Bible. And if you're not familiar with it, it's basically the Apostle Paul, and he's going from city to city in the New Testament preaching about Jesus. And at one point, from going from city to city, his life is threatened, and the people that he's with get him on a boat, and they send him to Athens, Greece. And so Paul finds himself walking through Athens, noticing that they have all these statues and temples dedicated to their Greek gods. And he notices that there is an altar to an unknown God. And so Paul takes it on himself to take the opportunity to talk to them about this unknown God. And he says, you don't know, but you have an altar to Jesus. And so he delivers this great speech to the local philosophical council. He begins to tell them that he knows about this unknown God and begins to tell them. And I have the scripture up here, so I'm just going to read this. There's one spelling mistake in here that I have pointed in, so sorry. So this is what he says. This is what he says when he goes to the council. He says, "The God who made the world and everything in it is the Lord of heaven and earth, and he does not live in man-made temples built by human hands. He is not served by human hands as if he needed anything. Rather, he himself gives everyone life and breath and everything else. From one man he made all nations, that they would seek him and perhaps reach out for him and find him. Though he's not very far from us, in him we live and move and have our being." That they would seek him and perhaps reach out for him and find him, though he's not far from any one of us. And so this morning, I want to focus on that small section where Paul talks about that we would seek God and perhaps reach out for him because he's not far from any one of us. And I love this passage because there's so much that we can pull out of it. Because our salvation does lie in what Jesus did on the cross, and because it's offered to all mankind. But all mankind doesn't just inherit this gift that God has for us. And like most gifts, it's something that we have to unwrap. And so we're required to do some work to unwrap God's gift. And Paul says there's action on our part. We have this gift, and the action is in the form of seeking and reaching out and finding God. And so don't mishear me. The Bible is clear that salvation is for everyone. That sacrifice has already been taken place by what Jesus did on the cross. And so we don't have to sacrifice anything for our salvation. That's what God did for us with Jesus. But there's action on our part to get it. And that's by seeking and reaching. And so this morning I just wanted to share a few illustrations to help you understand this. And we've been kind of leading up to this moment with the retreat weekend, and I've been talking lots around what we're going to talk about. So I have three kind of illustrations that I want to use kind of from my own life and from stuff that I've really come to appreciate. So I'm going to put a picture up. I'm going to just turn so I can see this. So you can't really see it. This is a picture of the Roslyn, British Columbia Search and Rescue volunteer team. And this picture is taken right from the news. And it's a story about 10 skiers that have gone missing on Red Mountain. Now, Red Mountain in British Columbia is one of the best ski resorts in Canada for powder ski. And the reason I know this story so much is that just stand up here, this guy right here is my brother, and he was on the search and rescue team. And you can kind of see him kind of separated from the group. So he was a volunteer for several years at the base of this giant mountain in Roslyn. And so he begins to tell me this story about what this picture was all about. And so this picture is about 10 skiers that were in a group of 10 skiers, and they decided to go skiing on Red Mountain, and they went out of bounds somewhere on the mountain, somewhere where they weren't supposed to be, and they got themselves lost. And the ski hill, I don't know if you've ever been to British Columbia in the interior, the ski hills there close at 3 o'clock because the sun goes behind the mountains, and they don't put lights on the hills. And so it got dark real quick. They couldn't find this group. So at 4 o'clock, it's almost pitch black. And this group has gone missing. And so they put the call out that they couldn't find the skiers. They couldn't locate them. And so they called the search and rescue. And my brother begins to tell me how they conduct their searches out there. And when he started telling me, I found it quite fascinating how they look for people. And so what they do, you can see my brother, and you can't really see him, but he's holding his skis. And so what they do when someone goes missing is they get 30 skiers. And they send the skiers up the chairlift to ski down the hill. And then they get 30 snowshoers, put the snowshoes on, and walk up the hill. And then they get snowmobilers, and this this is snowmobile country, so you kind of know. They get snowmobilers to drive between cabins that have been built for the purpose of searching for people on the mountain. And so there's 4 or 5 cabins on the mountain range within Red Mountain that the snowmobilers will travel to and create trails to the cabins. And then they put 3 or 4 people in each cabin, and they have a fire going, and there's warm drinks. And so you have all these people on the mountain. People going up, and people going down, and people going across. And my brother said the reason we have snowmobilers going to these cabins is if you're lost in the middle of nowhere, and you come across a snowmobile trail, what are you likely to do? You're going to follow it. And so they have basically made a path to safety. So if someone's out wandering and they come across a snowmobile trail, you'll either find where the snowmobile went or where the snowmobile came from. And so they have these snowmobiles going to these cabins that are built for people to come to them. And he says, the idea is that if you're kind of out there, you'll look for safety. And then I got to talk to my brother about the philosophy of how they're looking for someone. I think there's the next slide up there. This is their unwritten philosophy of the Roslyn Search and Rescue, and it's this: to create such a commotion that the lost come to us. He says, when we're out there looking for someone, it's like a needle in a haystack. And so he says, when we're out on the mountain, we create such a commotion that the lost will come to us. And I thought that was fascinating, because they're not actually looking for them. They're just creating a scene so that they can be found. When I spoke this one time, and this one kid said, well, why did the people that were lost just walk down the mountain to safety? And I thought, that's a good question. I mean, you're thinking about that. And so I asked my brother, and he said, that's what these skiers did. They thought they could save themselves, and they started walking down the mountain. What they didn't realize was they were on the other side of the mountain, and they were walking into the interior of British Columbia. And they were getting themselves more lost. And so he says it's vitally important when we're on the mountain that we're successful in attracting the lost. And as he began to tell me this story, I began to think of the Apostle Paul. And he's making a similar claim in the book of Acts, that God has made such a commotion in humanity that perhaps we should go and find God. And that poses the question in my mind is, why is it that God wants us to come to him? We always talk about going to God. But this scripture says that God doesn't want that. Like, God wants us to go to him. And we always talk about God coming to us. And that started kind of going around in my mind, is why does God want us to come to him? It would be easier if God did everything for us, and God set everything up. But if God did everything for us, we wouldn't realize our need for him. That's why God desires that. We wouldn't realize our need for him. And so everyone comes to this crossroads at some point in their life and wonders, why do we actually need God? I've been there. I think lots of people have been there. Why do we actually need God? You might have someone in your life that you have those conversations with. You might be a long-time follower of Jesus, and at times maybe reluctantly ask the side of your doubt, why do we need God? Or you might be here and you don't even believe. Why do I need God? And so I want to illustrate this with another story. A few years ago, we had our first child. His name was Cooper. I think, there he is. He was born 2 years ago. This PowerPoint is slightly dated because I spoke this at the time he was born. And so he was born on July 16th, 2016. Normal pregnancy, normal delivery. He was born. It seemed like he was very healthy. But he wasn't on this earth for more than 2 days when we realized he was dying. And on the outside, you looked at this and you're like, oh, this is our son. He looks so great. But on the second day of his life, he was rushed to sick kids in Toronto with an infection in his bowel that was killing him. It was shutting down his liver. So he spent 17 days of his life, his first life, in the neonatal intensive care unit. And this is a picture of him and I about a weekend. So I just said 2 days old, spent 17 days with a severe bowel infection. And that's him and I spending some time together 2 days after he was born. And so 3 months after Cooper was born and they diagnosed him and figured out what was going on, he had to have 6-hour surgery to remove 4 inches of his bowel. And what they determined was he had congenital bowel obstruction that at the tail end of his bowel that wouldn't allow him to go to the bathroom. And so he had to have a 6-hour surgery to remove 4 inches of basically dead intestines. They didn't even cut him open at Sick Kids. I didn't even ask questions. What they did there was amazing. And so I tell you that story to understand God. And I think there's a picture of him and I. This is literally right after his surgery. I think I kind of put that out on Instagram. This is not more than 3 weeks ago. This was like 2 years ago. But he grabbed my finger, and I just sat there with him. And today he's doing amazing. The microphone is coming off, and I taped it. Today he's a 2-year-old and he's texting me. I'll try not to touch it. Today he started texting me little emojis on my phone, so he's learning how to use his cell phone. So I'm not sure if that's wise on my wife's behalf. And so in the first year of Cooper's life, we spent the whole year in and out of hospital dealing with life-threatening infection. And so I tell you that because this is where we understand why we need God. This is going to get really tinny. Jesus was once questioned by religious leaders and scholars, and people that believed that they were good enough on their own, that their own rules and belief in God was good enough. And so these religious leaders came to Jesus, and they said, "Why do you hang around with sinners?" Some Bibles are translated sinners into scum. Why do you hang around with scum? Why do you hang around with people that are undeserving of your attention? And this was Jesus' response. I think this was Jesus' response from Luke 5. Healthy people don't need a doctor, sick people do. I've come to call sinners to turn from their sin, not to spend time with those who think they're already good enough. And that was Jesus' response. And I kind of came to the conclusion that Jesus doesn't really have time for our arrogance or stubbornness to admit that we need him. He desires to spend time with people that realize their need for him. And that's what he's telling these people. They're all high and mighty. And Jesus wants to sit down with people that understand their need for him. And that's the understanding that they're broken and they can't fix themselves. And all through life, Jesus in the Bible, it's about him prompting us to do something about our sin. And that involves coming to him to deal with it and be saved. And so I think in the next slide, I've got a few examples of where he says that. So here's a few of them. Come to me, all you who are weary and burdened. That's in Matthew. Come and follow me. Let the children come. Can I switch mics? This is really... Can I go to this one? He says, let the little children come to me, and then at the very end, he says, but you are not willing to come to me to have life. So he kind of flips it on its end. And so Jesus needs us to realize that we need him and follow through with that with action, and actually go to him. And I kind of liken that to... Working on that? Yep. Oh, there we go. And so I think Jesus' response, that's really good. Thanks. And so Jesus' response to these people that are asking him, why do you hang out with people that are undeserving? I kind of liken Jesus to like the search party on the mountain. I mean, Jesus has come for us. The Bible says it's very clear, but it says that you also have to seek me out. And again, we don't have to work for our salvation, but we have to work to realize our need. And so Jesus has created the ultimate commotion in humanity by sacrificing himself for us to be saved from our sin, and all we need to do is work towards him, knowing that we can't do what he's already done. It's already been taken care of for us. And all he's asking is for us to realize our need and move towards him. Reach out and grab salvation. So here's my last illustration. This is a picture of Michelangelo's Sistine Chapel. And Michelangelo was hired to paint the whole ceiling. And this is his most famous illustration called God and Adam. And I don't know if you've ever looked or studied at this, but I think Michelangelo seemed to understand, or began to understand, this concept that we need to pursue God. So here's a close-up. If you look at the comparison, so let's just go back one. We'll kind of go back to the bigger picture. If you compare the two, if you look at God, he's fully committed. His arm is outstretched. His finger is, for the most part, outstretched. He's turned towards him. He's intently looking at him. And here's Adam, sitting there without a care in the world, with his hand kind of resting on his knee, and his hand just kind of going limp. Literally, all he has to do is lift his finger to connect with God, and he doesn't. And maybe Adam doesn't realize how close he is to God. Maybe because he thought he was God's first creation, that he was already good enough. Didn't have to put a huge effort into it. Whatever the reason, it's Adam who simply just needs to lift a finger and move towards God. So in the last part of the verse in Acts, did I put it on there? In the last part of Acts, in Acts 17:27, it says he's not far from any one of us. He's not far from any one of us. And going back to the mountain, my brother revealed to me that the lost were located, and they were literally separated by just a few hundred feet, but they could not find them. And it's when the lost heard the commotion on the mountain that they started moving towards the team that were looking for them. They're out there kind of making this commotion. And they started moving towards safety. And it's a funny thing that when we're lost, we don't want to stay lost. And when we're sick, we don't want to stay sick. We want to be better. We want to be found. And Jesus says, when you're lost and when you're sick, which, by the way, are both analogies in Scripture for being separated from God as well. Jesus says, when you're lost and when you're sick, and you realize that, move towards me. God does not desire us to be separated from him. And Jesus says, when you realize the sin in your life, and when you realize the need for me, come to me, because I'm not far. The Apostle Paul, in this awesome scripture in Acts, says, this is paraphrasing, follow God's commotion in your life and just lift the finger and be with him. It's basically what Acts is saying, what he's saying in Acts. Follow God's commotion in your life and lift the finger and be with him. That's all we have to do. And Jesus has made such this commotion in our lives that we would seek out and reach him. Because he's not far from any one of us. And so whether you've known Jesus all your life, or whether you're here and you're not entirely sure about all this God stuff, we have this great invitation to be with Jesus and continue being with Jesus. And there are times, admittedly, that I don't pursue God as much as I should, and I think there's lots of people in here that would admit that too. I mean, I've been a Christian for almost 25 years, and I don't pursue God as much as I should, but I have not given up because of what He's done in my life. And so, I guess may you realize the commotion that God has placed in your life, both at one time in history with Jesus and now. I think that God is working all around us now. And sometimes we don't recognize that. Because maybe we don't realize we're lost. Or maybe we don't realize we're sick. And that's what we need to realize. And so God is saying, wherever you are in your journey of knowing me, I've pursued you. And don't stop pursuing me. And I think Adam is a perfect example of what we shouldn't be doing. Adam is a perfect example of what we shouldn't be doing. Here's what I want to leave you with today. Here's my big idea. It's very simple. God pursues us, but we have to pursue God. And our lives get busy, and we forget, and sometimes we don't meet with God as much as we should, and sometimes we don't recognize Him. But if we don't start prioritizing and moving towards God, that's not going to do us any good. God has fully pursued us. And if we don't fully pursue Him, it's not going to do us any good. So I have one last question, and this is rhetorical. And I kind of thought of this spur of the moment. But what would our relationship with God look like if we pursued Him as much as He pursues us? I think we need to figure out how we need to change our disposition to be fully committed, because we don't want to be like Adam in that picture. What would it look like if we pursued God as much as He pursues us? Let's pray. Father, forgive us when we have not pursued You, when we have not recognized You, when we have not realized our need for You. And so, God, I just pray that as we continue on this journey of pursuing You, would You just continue to pursue us? Help us to learn from people that are good at doing that. Help us to order our days so that we have time for You. Thank You for loving us and not giving up on us, even though sometimes we give up on You. And so we just ask that You continue to pursue us and love us in the hopes that we would do the same. In Your name.